Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Joan Octor, Director of Professional Development at NASSP, and I'll be your moderator today. Our topic is talking about terrorism with your school community. NASSP's professional development mission is to provide real-time support to principals when facing emergency issues and topics in their school communities. To that end, we're providing a series of 2 webinars providing guidance on how to proactively deal with terrorism in your school communities. We're honored to have with us today 2 experts, one a family life educator and the other a psychologist specializing in stressful life events. Before I introduce them, allow me to recognize both Dr. Myers-Walls and Dr. Silver for so graciously and promptly responding and agreeing to talk with us today, and for serving as role models of how we should work together as one big professional community. Just a few housekeeping details before we get started. As you participate in this webinar, we invite you to expand the conversation As you participate in this webinar, we invite you to expand the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag NASSPWEBINAR, and you can also follow NASSP on Twitter. Our handle is @NASSP. We are also on Facebook at facebook.com/principals. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Judith Myers-Walls. She is Professor Emerita of Human Development and Family Studies at Purdue University. Her research interests include the cultural context of children and families, peace education, and the impact of war and peace on children and families. We also have Dr. Roxanne Cohen-Silver, Professor, Department of Psychology and Social Behavior, the Department of Medicine, and the Program of Public Health, University of California. Dr. Silver is an international expert in the field of stress and coping, including larger collective events such as terror attacks, war, and national disasters across the world.
Good afternoon. This is Roxanne Silver, and I'd like to start the conversation this afternoon by asking a question, whether you believe it is true or false. The question is, watching a disaster unfold on television is very different from watching it directly, and one should not expect similar post-traumatic stress responses among those distant from the site of a tragedy when compared to direct victims. So is this true or false? Well, let's consider what the research says. Can we have the next slide, please? The research is actually quite clear. Across a number of studies that began shortly after the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks, we learned that watching events like the 9/11 attacks live on television, that is, seeing the plane hit the World Trade Center or seeing the buildings collapse, can result in very similar psychological responses as direct exposure to the trauma. Next slide. In fact, indirect exposure to a traumatic event appears to induce a post-traumatic stress response that is very similar as responses to direct exposure. And so today we are going to talk about how people respond when they learn about attacks such as the recent Paris attacks across the world. It is actually a myth of coping with traumatic life events to assume that psychological responses to these kinds of terrible events will be limited to those directly exposed to a traumatic event. In fact, we see very similar responses even when people only learn of events via the media. I'd like to share with you an email I received a few months ago from a student. Hi, Dr. Silver. My name is Vicki, and I'm reaching out to you after searching on the internet about what to do after witnessing a traumatic event and seeing your name in one of the articles. Last week, I was scrolling through the news and clicked on the article about the execution of the Jordanian pilot. In that article was a 3-minute video. I've actually clipped out her long, detailed description to me of what she saw on the video. But I then would like to share with you what she continued. Ever since watching that clip, which wasn't even the whole video, I've been thinking about it every single day. The thoughts are intrusive, and a couple of times I can't even eat or do schoolwork. I can't help constantly thinking of ways I could have saved him. At times it bothers me so much that I start crying. I know this sounds stupid, and this is why I can't bring myself to tell my friends, because I realize how weird this all sounds. I have no history of mental illness, and I'm a healthy, normal person who is usually very happy. It's just that for over a week now, I can't help thinking about the video clips and images I've seen. Now, while this is the most graphic email that I have received, I have had numerous people describe to me psychological consequences of learning about terrible events like the beheadings in the Middle East or like the attacks in Boston or like the attacks in Paris. And I'd like to spend a few minutes discussing the important role of the media. Next slide. Thank you. The media landscape has changed even in the last few years. So although we have a great deal of information that we learned about the impact of the media after the 9/11 attacks, back in 2001, we really only focused on traditional media like television, radio, and print. But now, young people, or people of all ages, actually hold the media in their hands, in their smartphones. And as we know, students are particularly tied to their smartphone and to social media, Facebook, Twitter, online news sites, YouTube, and Reddit, where uncensored information and uncensored pictures show up all the time. And what I'd like to argue is that this is an extremely important issue that we must be aware of and attentive to. Next slide. There were earlier concerns about media exposure that focused exclusively on children. So maybe 10, 15 years ago, people thought we really need to pay attention to the media and media exposure in young people, that is, elementary school children or even younger preschool children. But it is now clear that the message regarding media is relevant for individuals of all ages, students of all ages, from preschool through university, teachers and administrators. This is a message that is extremely important, and it is not, we should not only be worrying about children. Next slide. This slide shows you some data that my colleagues and I collected and published last year in the early aftermath of the Boston Marathon bombing. And let me just take a few minutes to explain what this slide is. We asked about 4,700 people within a few days after the Boston Marathon to tell us about their psychological responses to the marathon. We asked individuals about what is called the acute stress symptoms that they might have been experiencing, including ruminations about what they witnessed, anxiety, fear, nightmares. And so across vertically, I am mapping out the number of acute stress symptoms that a national sample of individuals are reporting. And this is, again, about 4,700 people. We had in this sample people from all over the United States, including Boston, New York metropolitan area, but again, a representative sample of the U.S. Horizontally, we are plotting the number of hours on average that people are reporting of being exposed to bombing-related media in the week after the bombing. This is not just television. These are the combined hours in which people are spending on both traditional media and social media, checking their Facebook, checking Twitter, perhaps listening to the radio, going back to the television, or doing this all simultaneously. Let me mention that the average number of hours across the United States was about 4.5 hours of media exposure a day. In our sample, which started at age 18, we're seeing 4.5 hours a day on average. We don't have data from children, but we might even assume that children or young people are being exposed to even more media than adults. And what I'd like you to notice here is that with increasing hours of exposure, combined exposure to all forms of media in the week after the bombings, we see a direct increase in the number of symptoms. Next slide. This slide shows this even more dramatically. If you look at the left, these are the number of acute stress symptoms that were shown by individuals who were directly exposed to the marathon. That is, individuals who either ran in the marathon, watched it, or were in the neighborhood of the lockdown. Look at the far right. We found that individuals who were exposed to more than 6 hours a day, now again, this is above the mean. The mean is 4.5, but this is not an abnormal number of hours of exposure. But individuals who were exposed to 6 or more hours of media in the aftermath of the Boston Marathon, in the week after the Boston Marathon, were experiencing 3 times as many symptoms as individuals who were at the marathon themselves. Next slide, please. Can I see the next slide, please? Can you hit it? Yes. Repeated media-based exposure to traumatic events can be toxic. We see a stronger association with acute stress response from the media than with direct exposure. And both the quantity and quality of this exposure are important. The content of exposures matters. So graphic images are particularly toxic. Repetitive exposure to graphic bloody images is associated with ongoing worry. And we also found that this repetitive exposure to graphic bloody images that we saw after the Boston Marathon actually enhanced distress and impaired functioning months later. We have been following these 4,600 people for the last several years. What we see is that this repeated exposure is not psychologically benefit and in fact may be quite damaging. Next slide. In fact, there is no psychological benefit to this exposure. People should be informed to walk away from the media. They should be encouraged not to repost or retweet, and this information should be available to students and teachers and parents. I might also mention that on some of these sites, like Reddit or YouTube, where you have user-generated content, there is nobody who is watching to make sure that these graphic images are appropriate, and we saw immediately after the Paris attacks of a couple of weeks ago very graphic images that could be found, just like the graphic ISIS video that the young woman who sent me the email saw of the burning of the Jordanian pilot. Next slide. So I have some final takeaway and policy implications of the work. Widespread media coverage of community-wide disasters can extend the boundaries of local disasters and can take them across the Atlantic. The media, we believe, may be the conduit through which this trauma that occurs in Europe is diffused widely to the U.S., and an event's impact may be felt far beyond the directly exposed population. And very importantly, the media's impact appears to be cumulative. We appear to be increasingly sensitized rather than inoculated by increased exposure. And this suggests that this is a problem that may only increase in intensity and concern. I'd now like to invite Dr. Myers-Walls to speak before we take some question and answers.
Thank you, Dr. Silver. And before Dr. Meyer-Walls starts, I'd like to invite you, if you have questions, to please type them into the right-hand column on the page. And as soon as Dr. Myers-Walls completes her presentation, we'll address your questions. So please feel free to add your questions now. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here today and to share my comments. I just quickly wanted to comment on what you just saw. That's very consistent with what I've seen in the literature that talks about the fact when you see something in media, especially modern media, you're often seeing it very close, very intensively. When it's entertainment media, you also have music to enhance it, but you are only an observer. And I think one reason why it becomes even more stressful is that you can't really do anything about what you are seeing in front of you or holding in your hand. So that inability to really interact and influence the events you're seeing may increase the feelings of being out of control, which contribute to some of these stress reactions. But here is what I want to talk about, the possible reactions of middle schoolers and high schoolers to events like this, some dangers to avoid and some opportunities to grasp. One of the things I'd like to focus on is the fact that the vast majority of people who experience these events, whether it's live or by the media, do not get post-traumatic stress disorder or do not exhibit extreme stress reactions. It's very important to look for those reactions, to be aware when you do see them, but recognize that the majority of people will not react at that level. So what are the other reactions and what do we need to watch for? Go to the next slide. The possible reactions, actually, let me start by saying that middle schoolers and high schoolers will probably have different reactions. We need to recognize there will be a big change across that time period. High schoolers are more likely to have developed defense mechanisms that can protect them from stressful reactions. They are more likely to have developed a feeling of being more powerful, being able to control things around them, have more of an internal locus of control, and they also have greater experience that can help them. So be aware of the age level that you're dealing with. The first possible reaction I wanted to talk about is this no big deal bravado thing. This is likely to go on, especially with high schoolers who are feeling emotionally vulnerable because they're learning how to control their emotions. They're self-conscious about it, so they want to show that they're not going to be impacted. And they certainly don't want to be manipulated by the media. So they may act like they don't care, and it's no big deal. And this is especially true for those who are in risk situations and may experience a lot of violence in their immediate lives. It really is not as important to look at these distance events as the ones that are right around them. Some of these people might react more later, but they may start with this no big deal, I'm just fine kind of reaction. Another possible reaction, next slide, is finding blame or trying to figure out how to control this, how to make sure it doesn't happen in your life. So this is kind of finding a balance between feeling like something needs to be done and feeling like we can make sure that it never happens again. This is an obsession in the U.S., is to try to control things and try to eliminate risk, which of course we can't actually do. But looking for who is at fault, how can we make sure it doesn't happen? Next slide. Another possibility is to react with fear, and that's the number one thing that adults and parents recognize when these events occur, when they're concerned about their kids. They're worried about their children being afraid or worried. And that may happen. I mean, fear has been called a disease of the what-ifs. And the more we experience, the more these events occur, the more what-ifs we're aware of. We now know that shoes can be bombs, and we now know that some of these bombs can happen at concerts and so on. It's adding to the possibilities in our lives. It's not as likely that fear is the first reaction, at least looking at the U.S. and the Paris bombings, among older kids as opposed to younger kids. The older kids are more aware of how far away the events were. At least theoretically, they're more aware, and they may be more aware of what the real dangers are. But these fears may be higher in certain populations, especially those who know that there could be repercussions among their population. Next slide. Another possibility is that some of these kids will react with anger and a desire to retaliate, feeling like something about that something is at risk and they want to fight back. So they may want to lash out, they may want to, this may go along with the blame, with the fear, they may want to destroy the risk. It's important to introduce alternatives to fighting back and help kids recognize that there are other things that can be done. Because the media may make them feel helpless, this may be a real desire, but it may be hard for young people to know how to express their anger and where to direct it. Next slide. I'm wondering what other responses you've seen among kids. Feel free to add it to the chat column, and we'll respond to them as time goes on. My next category is dangers to avoid. This is recognizing, yes, trauma could be an opportunity, well, could be an opportunity. That could be a reaction that you could see. Watch for trauma signs among the kids and staff in your program. You've seen some of the issues that may come up, but let's look at some others. Next slide. One possibility is that young people will respond with apathy. In some of my work, in talking to a young person after 9/11, I had him say, it was either 9/11 or another situation, but anyway, his comment was, I don't care if there's a war as long as it doesn't affect me and my family. We spent a lot of time after the Persian Gulf War talking to kids about how far away it was. Don't worry, it's not here. What that might do is communicate the idea that you don't need to worry about anything that isn't right here. We do want kids to use their sense of empathy and to care about other people. So we need to be careful not to dismiss it too distantly and let them know that it doesn't matter. But we need to be aware that for some people, this idea of not caring, or at least looking like they don't care, is a defense mechanism. We need to be careful about disrupting that without replacing it with some actions to take. Next slide. Another possibility is that the kids do care, but they're overwhelmed. They may feel like the world is falling apart. We're reaching the apocalypse. Maybe not a zombie apocalypse that many of the kids might talk about, but it may feel like every time you turn around, there's another event and terrorism is surrounding us. And there are adults who feel that way too. It's important to not only look at those negative events, that's what the media do, is they focus on the entire world's negative events and concentrate them all together. We need to make sure that young people are also exposed to the positive and hopeful things that are going on. So talk about what people are doing to bring others together, to mend fences, to move to a more peaceful world. Next slide. Another real possibility here is labeling people and not actions. By that I mean, instead of saying that these people use terrorist tactics, we start labeling them as terrorists. Instead of saying that there are people who made some bad choices, we start talking about bad guys. We start talking about extremists. Once we've labeled people, then that's what they become. So a terrorist will exercise terrorist activities because that's what a terrorist does. We've defined the person that way. We need to be very careful because then that can really make the world seem like a very dangerous place. It also may make the kids feel like they also are being labeled in some way. If they make a bad decision, they have a choice to make a good decision the next time. So do other people. The more we talk about making bad decisions or taking actions rather than labeling people, the more possibility there is that things can turn around and get better. So try to build that sense of hope and possibility for change. Next slide. Obviously, there are other issues going on here with prejudice and labeling of groups of people. So we need to be very careful that those seeds don't get sown in the young people. This is a time of their lives when they can pick up those stereotypes, they can pick up those prejudices that they will carry with them the rest of their lives. Even though things may change and friendships may change, alliances may change, they may carry those prejudices. My mother-in-law went to her grave not trusting the Japanese because of being young when the Second World War took place. We need to be very careful that we are not assuming that all Syrians are dangerous and that we're not assuming all Muslims use terrorist tactics. Help them learn about other people and other populations. Next slide. Another is that you as a school can take a biased approach. It's hard to avoid because you have your own opinions. Be careful that you recognize that you have a diversity of people in your schools. You will have pacifists, you'll have people who want to take military solutions. You will have people who are Muslim, and you'll have people who are Christian, and people who are atheist, and people who are Jewish, and so on. Be careful that your approaches are validating the variety of beliefs and backgrounds that the students bring to your school. Next slide. So think again about dangers and what else you might have considered in your school. Feel free to add your thoughts to the chat box. Next slide. There are also opportunities to grasp here. We've hinted at some of these. Let's look at some specifics. Next slide. One opportunity is to use this information about events that are happening around you in the curriculum. There are many ways to possibly do this. It looks like it's a happy thing to do according to this graphic, but it may not be quite that easy. But there are things that can be done clearly in social studies classes, in history, in geography, even in English, possibly in home ec classes. You can talk about the foods and the lifestyles of people in other countries. It may be harder to incorporate it into math class or into chemistry, and some of those may be a little more difficult, but there are ways to teach students how all the events happening around us are related to the subject matter they're learning in classes. And more importantly, we can teach students how to process information about current events. Next slide. Another opportunity is to do something. That makes us all feel better if something is actually happening. It's a way to get control over what is happening and to try to build a more positive future. This can be done locally, it can be done globally, it can be done in one classroom, it can be done in an entire school system or across the country. But find out what other people are doing so that you see what the options are and see where the gaps are. Next slide. This is an opportunity to build leadership among the students. They can learn in their clubs, in their classrooms, in organizations with the school, in the whole community. They can learn how to find an issue that means something to them and make a difference. Let the students take the leadership. It's a very important role for them to play, and that will help them feel less helpless and less overwhelmed. Next slide. Again, I'm asking for other things that you might have seen when it comes to building leadership and what other opportunities you see out of these events. So next slide. Yeah, let me know if you think about other things that you'd like to add in the chat box. And then my final slide. I would suggest several actions based on this. First, for school personnel, take care of yourselves. Know if you are overwhelmed. Know what your biases are. Make sure that you don't find yourself tied to the media and dragging your students along because you want to know what's going on. Get yourself under control. If you can't, bring someone else in and monitor your reactions. Second point, and this is clearly made by Dr. Silver as well, teach media literacy to everybody in the school system. Know what it means to be constantly connected. Know how to use social media and what are the dangers. And then finally, learn about diverse populations and beliefs. Figure out what actions that you can take to make a difference for the world around you. That's the end of my formal presentation. So, yeah, the person who says I don't see any chat, yes, that was part of the chat, but it'd be nice to hear what else people had in mind.
Well, we do have a few questions, and then we will go to Dr. Silver, who has a few more slides to share with us. But one of our viewers has asked, what if my children don't want to talk about it? Should I bring it up? And would one of you like to address that question?
My reaction to that is that, first of all, children's first reaction when something stressful has occurred is to try to get back to normal. That's especially true of younger children, but I think even high schoolers, their first reaction is, okay, something has changed, something big has happened, what else is going to change? And they want to know a routine is being disrupted. So they may react with that feeling of just, let's go back to normal. And teenagers, as I pointed out earlier, also may say, no big deal, I'm not impacted. That may make the adults think, okay, I don't need to talk about it. And because it's hard to talk about, the adults may be relieved and think, we'll just go on. Then the children may look at the adults' reactions and say, oh, it's not okay to bring it up because they're not bringing it up. So maybe I shouldn't talk about it. And then you end up with what I've called the cycle of silence. Neither side is bringing it up because they think the other side either didn't notice or doesn't care or it's not appropriate to talk about. You lose an opportunity to have an educational or supportive discussion and experience. So you may think that they haven't noticed, but they may have. I would recommend that you open the door and you make it clear, either in a school or in a family, that it's okay to bring it up. A big thing happened, a lot of people are talking about it. If you'd like to talk about it, let me know, and we will. So that you have made it clear it's not taboo, it is okay to bring it up.
This is Roxanne Silver. I also agree with that. I think it's a mistake not to bring up something like the Paris attacks, because one can be certain that the students are learning about this in the media. And even if it's not being discussed in the classroom, it may be discussed in the hallways or in the lunchroom. So I think that one can certainly bring up something like, did you hear about the events? Is there anything anybody wants to talk about it? I think that it is a mistake to assume that if it is not discussed directly in the classroom, that it is not being discussed in the school.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question that's a bit similar. Should difficult news events like this be addressed by schools if the students haven't raised the issue?
I think these are the kinds of events, this is Judy Myerswald, I think these are the kinds of events that children will, well, when they become adults, will look back and say, I remember where I was when I found out, that sort of thing. And if the schools ignore it, then that will become part of their memory and part of their understanding about whether it's okay to bring it up. I think it's also a wonderful time for schools to be able to provide some educational information and help young people interpret it in a responsible educational way.
Okay, thank you. We have another question that says, what if children ask, why does terrorism happen? How do you respond to them?
I think that's a very interesting question that no one can easily answer. I think it depends on the age of the child. I would say if you're dealing with a 6th or 7th grader, then you may want to look a little bit at the definition of terrorism, look at some history, see about what we've learned in other times when terrorist approaches have been used. I think if you're dealing with older kids, and I would say maybe with all kids, is to have them ask them first, what do you think? What have you heard? What do you think and why that might happen? And then together perhaps explore some sources of information to begin to find out what some of the possible reasons are and recognize that it is not simple and simplistic.
Do you have any other comments, Dr. Silver?
No, I think that that's an excellent answer.
Okay. And then we have one question that says, when children ask painful questions, I don't know what to say. Should I say nothing? It seems like they're all following in the same pattern.
I think it's really important to affirm the kids for asking those questions and say, that is a hard question, isn't it? And I'm glad you're thinking about it. I'm glad you're thinking about how people might feel, or yes, sometimes it is painful. One of the things that we want to avoid is what a colleague of mine has called hoovering. Today it probably ought to be called Dysoning or something like that, because it's thinking about vacuum cleaners and what we do with dirt. We suck it up, put it in a bag, and throw it all away. And often adults try to do that with children's unpleasant feelings. When they feel sad or angry or concerned, we try to give them a cookie and make it go away. And that's really inappropriate in helping children understand how to deal with those negative feelings. It's part of being alive. We should affirm the kids for recognizing those and then start exploring with them what you can do with those negative feelings. Yes, I feel angry too that people attacked other people and killed them. That is not the way the world is supposed to work. And I just want to make it go away. How could we do that? What could we do in our world so that we could make it less likely that people would take those approaches? That's accepting the fact that they have some unpleasant feelings, but then trying to turn around to talk about what to do with those feelings and how to move more toward the positive.
One thing that Dr. Myers-Walls commented in her previous slide was the important message that school personnel need to care for themselves and monitor their own reactions. So I think that it's very, very important that teachers prepare themselves for the possibility of these kinds of questions and feel comfortable talking about their own feelings. I do think that oftentimes we want to minimize these experiences ourselves, but I think it's unlikely that we can keep this out of young people's minds, and even if we think that we can keep it out of the classroom, it's going to still come up. Therefore, I think it is extremely appropriate, as Dr. Myers-Walls is saying, that we allow the children to report on their feelings, and the teachers should also be conveying their own distress about this. I think it's important to be honest with one's emotions, and I think that validates the discomfort that the students feel. One doesn't want to minimize those feelings or make people feel that these feelings are abnormal or unusual. In fact, they're quite normal and quite appropriate under the circumstances. And to minimize them will only leave individuals who are feeling them to feel that there's something crazy about them, there's something unusual about them, rather than that their reactions are quite normal.
And that leads
The only caveat I would give to that, though, is that as a teacher or an adult, make sure that you can express those feelings without dumping them on the kids, without overwhelming the kids. You are their primary source. You're a foundation for them. You're a source of security for them. And if you fall apart in front of them, that's going to make it more difficult for them. So make sure that you can express those feelings in a reasonable way. If you can't, get out of the classroom and get somewhere where you can get some help, get someone else to take your place. So expressing your feelings, I think, is very important, but don't totally melt down in front of the kids. That is putting too much pressure on them to take care of you.
And that leads us to a close question that we had from one school leader who said that their faculty don't feel comfortable responding to these questions because they don't want to say anything that's harmful, and they're asking how they prepare their teachers or their staff to answer these questions. Do you have advice for them?
Well, my feeling is that you're usually on pretty good ground if you let the kids take the lead. So you find out what they know. You ask them what they're thinking. You ask them what they've been concerned about, and then maybe explore answers with them. You don't need to give answers to the children. You don't need to answer all of their questions. You can hear their questions and discuss them. You can provide information about exact events, but a way to be inclusive is to make sure that you are listening and following their lead, figuring out what they are feeling a need to do with it. Of course, that's challenging in a group when you have some kids who are much more ready to move ahead with something than others are. But to get a general sense and to be led by one of the other kids is a safer way to go and a more developmentally appropriate way to go, because you're more likely to deal with what is important to them.
One of the things we know about how to respond to individuals who are experiencing distress is that it is often painful if one minimizes what they're feeling. So if you just say, oh, cheer up, or forget about it, it's not important. Those kinds of comments just make the person who's experiencing the distress feel that they're going crazy or that their behavior is inappropriate. So I think that it is important not to minimize the feelings, and I think that what we have just heard is a perfectly appropriate way of dealing with it. Bounce it back to the children in the classroom and use it as a moment to explore their feelings.
Thank you. And one of our listeners has asked, is there a way to turn the conversation to ask the students if there is that, if they can think of possible solutions to help make these negative behaviors less possible? If when you're having those discussions, you can ask students if there are things that they could do that might change the way people feel or believe.
Well, I think you can do exactly that. I also would recommend, when you are prepared, well, you won't always be prepared ahead of time for these events, but when you know you're going to talk about them, if you have a chance, try to look up some of the flip side. Try to look up some relief efforts, or try to look up some of the recovery kinds of events that are occurring, some people who are making a difference on a positive side, so that you can prime the pump with that, and then maybe get them to start brainstorming other positive things that could be done. Some of this also could be facilitated by making sure that you include some kind of conflict resolution education in your schools, to have some idea of what increases conflict and what decreases it, because that would give them a foundation or a structure to begin to build on how to deal with current events, in addition to dealing with conflicts in the school itself.
Perfect ideas, and finding those sources to help all principals use them with their faculties and with their students would be an excellent thing to do. One additional question is, it's on the media, there are a lot of places where students go and could get information about how to join terrorist groups, and there's a lot of ways that even through their Xbox games they're reaching out to students. And on the news they stated, what are we doing to put positive communities up so children can go there and build communities in that way? Do you have any suggestions for the schools, the school leaders, the teachers on how to build those positive communities in those places for students to go to get positive reinforcement?
Well, I know one source to look at for social action in general, or a few sources have been created by Barbara A. Lewis, looking at the Kids Guide to Social Action. And she has a couple of books. There are other places like that that have really looked at ways to find examples of what young people have done that then can seed other ideas for other young people. So I think those can be helpful. I would also make sure that every school has some good opportunities for groups and organizations where kids can get together, and kids or young people, and really become a community, so that they don't feel like they need to reach out for other places. You know, again, we may not be able to fully avoid it, but make sure that you've got some of those, you know what the opportunities are in the community, which are likely to be more effective than the online sources anyway.
We do see after many of these kinds of events that people do come together. We do see a lot of volunteering, and people often feel a sense of pride in their fellow man when they see others joining together and focusing on the positive. So I think that we can identify opportunities in addition that can help the teacher and the school administrators prepare for the kinds of aftermath, the kinds of events that may occur. Again, we don't know the exact day that something like this is going to show up in our media, but we can I think, prepare for the possibility that something like this is going to happen during the school year. And I think that being planful and proactive is extremely important.
Thank you. We don't have additional questions at this point. We'll take a moment to wait and see if any of our other attendees would like to add a question and take advantage of these two outstanding experts we have with us today. And do either you, Dr. Myers-Walls or Dr. Silver, have additional comments you'd like to make in closing?
Well, if we have 3 or 4 minutes, I can go through some additional slides.
Okay, that's wonderful.
So we have I think we have a slide up on the screen. I'd like to just address what happens if one of these kinds of events occurs in one's own community. And I'd like to just ask the question of whether people believe this is true or false, that after a community tragedy, like a terrorist attack or a school shooting, it's a good idea to bring people together in a group to talk about their feelings, process their negative emotions, and, quote, debrief. So I'd like people to think about whether they believe that that's true or false, and then I'd like to go to the next slide, which shows us what the data say. Oh, I'm sorry, and the other question one would ask is should this happen very quickly after a tragedy, a community tragedy? Is it true or false that the quicker this processing occurs, the less likely people will develop long-term psychological problems? Next slide. Next. What we do know, in fact, is that research has demonstrated that these debriefing sessions have no positive effect at best and actually can be harmful. What seems to happen is to develop these sort of artificial debriefing sessions disrupts the formation and use of natural support systems in the immediate aftermath of a disaster. Next slide. And it's actually a myth to assume that these debriefings are helpful and necessary in the immediate aftermath of a trauma. Next slide. This is just a comic to acknowledge that what happens is that people come from the outside and descend upon a community like buzzards. It's hard to tell from here. Could be buzzards, could be grief counselors. It is often the case that people will reach out to a school and offer their services. The challenge is that without preparation, one has no quality control over these individuals who reach out. After the Columbine High School shootings, over 750 counselors, quote counselors, reached out to the Jefferson County School Board offering their services, and this was both overwhelming to the school community, and also there was no way of knowing who were the appropriate individuals to bring into the school. Next slide. So what I would recommend is pre-event preparation to facilitate community resilience in the aftermath of an event if it does occur in one's community. I think it's very important to coordinate services and agencies prior to the chaos of the immediate aftermath of a disaster. That is, identify authorities for communication and a clear chain of command, pre-establish relationships with media, and identify organizational entities who are responsible for mental health response and recovery, establish clear roles in advance, know who one is going to go to seek out assistance in advance of a tragedy so that in the immediate aftermath one has all of these issues sorted through. I think that can be very helpful in the chaos of the immediate aftermath of a disaster.
So I would like to thank both of our presenters today for again, when we reached out to you, for immediately responding and helping us with our community, being one of those experts to whom we could reach out and really help us understand what we need to do and how to improve the school setting and communities for our parents and our teachers and our students. We thank you so much, Dr. Silver and Dr. Myers-Walls, for all you've shared with us today. We think it will make it much easier for us moving forward, and we're thankful that we will have this webinar. It has been recorded, and so if you would like to have access to it, just go to nassp.org/webinars video, and you can use this. And it's available 24 hours whenever you may need to use it or would like to share it with your colleagues. And know that there is a follow-up webinar next week on December 10th from 3 to 4, where we'll be following up with this and talking about how to include this information in the social studies curriculum, and also a principal's perspective on how he's rallied the community to do all these things that both Dr. Myers-Walls and Silver have shared with us today. And finally, we'd like to invite you to meet with us in Orlando in February, the 25th through 27th, for our annual conference. And Dr. Myers-Walls and Dr. Silver, if you'd like to join us there, we'd sure love to have you do a session as well. So thank you so much, and thanks again to you for your time.